Hi. Thank you so much for coming out this unbelievably, impossibly gray spring day, almost spring day. I'm so pleased to present the second and final for the semester Potent Residence Reading Series reader, Patricia Foster. Patricia received her MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop and a PhD from Florida State University. She's the author of the memoir, All the Lost Girls, which was a winner of the Penn Gerard Fund Award, a book of essays, Just Beneath My Skin, which is awesome, and a novel, Girl from Soldier Creek. She's the editor of Mind in the Body, Women Writers on Body and Soul, Sister to Sister, and co-editor of The Healing Circle, and Understanding the Essay with Jeff Porter. A recipient of the Florida Arts Council Award, a Dean Scholar Award, and an Alabama Voices Award. Foster's work has appeared in numerous journals. Wow, I can't read today. She's been a professor in the MFA program in nonfiction at the University of Iowa for 19 years. It's because I want to get out that stuff, which is awesome. Clearly, we're really wonderfully blessed to have her with us today. I particularly want to say thank you to the Woodward Fund for supporting this event here on campus. As a part of that, Patricia went to senior high school today. We had a wonderful class with I think it was wonderful, with some of the students there today. And, but what I want to say is that Patricia's work is just wonderful. I would describe it as a mix between like this lyrical loveliness, which amazing insight, and then just this down-to-earth, funny humor. And again, the thing that I think strikes me the most is that love of writing, her belief in it as a resource is just inspiring. It really sort of a way of binding us to ourselves, I think, is one of the best ways I think I can think of her take on creative nonfiction, on the writing of the self. I'm going to steal a quote from her book, Just Beneath My Skin, just in the opening essay of the same title. And she says, I write autobiography because quite often I forget who I am and have to rediscover myself. On such days, there's only a thin wall between irrelevance and meaning. Only if I dig deep beneath the skin can I thicken that wall, shore myself up brick by clumsy brick. On those days, writing helps me make some kind of clarity when there's only been a mess of confusion. And I think, yeah, that sounds about right. And so I'm so happy and proud to ask you to join us in welcoming Patricia Foster.
Thank you. So I bring you a mess of confusion, huh? I was going to say, I think this is going to be brutal. It's going to be bleak and depressing and despairing, and I'm going to talk about menopause. Kidding. So anyway, I just wanted you to be aware of that. I could have talked about menopause. You would all be texting, and I would watch you and still talk. So there you go. I just want you to know I'm not shy. But I am, obviously, I've had somewhat of a bleak personality because Marianne gave me a crystal to wear. So this is supposed to be my, I guess my alternative self will come out somewhere in the reading, I hope. At least Marianne hopes. We will see. I visited Marianne in Spain, and she was a wonderful host. I'm going to have a hard time with this water bottle, so is there a place to put it?
I can do this.
Also, I hurt my leg, so I'm a bionic woman. I just wanted to tell you that I know I have the brace on. It's clearly, there's some parts of me that are not self-aware, but that part is. Well, today was very interesting because I taught at the high school class. We had a sort of sleep-in together, you might say. That's putting a positive spin on things because of the crystal. So let's just say that, but the teacher asked me this really interesting question. She said, what makes you write? And of course, I gave her some dumbass answer because I was partly sleeping too. But when I got back to the hotel, I thought about it and I thought, oh, that was stupid. So I thought, what makes me write? And I said, I immediately thought, I write about what hurts. I write about what's confusing. I write about what's haunting. I write about what's obsessive to me. I write about what I don't know about what I know, which is what I think most people do, right? They do that. And so when I wrote the book, All the Lost Girls, the memoir, I wrote about 3 generations of women, my grandmother, my mother, and me, 3 generations of women that I felt had been culturally silenced and in many ways traumatized by that silence. My grandmother was a woman who seems like utterly an anathema in today's world. She was a very Faulknerian character. She lived in the mining towns of Alabama, northern Alabama, and had 16 kids. Which seems traumatizing enough to me for one lifetime. 13 of those children lived, and she was a woman who was silenced in many ways because of lack of education, because of poverty, and because basically she functioned simply as a breeder in many ways. And her only recourse was essentially food. She was a very fat woman at the end. My mother came out of that generation, out of that family of 13 living kids. She was the oldest girl in the family, so you can imagine the responsibilities of a girl in a mining town with all those brothers and sisters. But my mother was the only one who got out of that mining town and went to college. And she went to college at 16 on a work scholarship to the University of Alabama. And only when I began writing the memoir did I understand. I knew that there was something that had been traumatized about my mother, other than the fact that she'd grown up in such poverty and such difficulty. But, you know, she was this beautiful woman, and we were so proud of her. But I never understood why my mother didn't want to be touched. And as a child really can't understand that. And it was only when I began writing All the Lost Girls, and my mother knew I was writing a book about these 3 generations of women, that she told me, seemingly, I mean, it was a very real surprise to me, that she had been raped at age 12 by her brother, which, and that she had never told anyone. That was the first person she'd ever told, and she was 72 years old. And of course, my first question was, why didn't you tell your mother? And she said, I couldn't tell my mother because my mother would have thought it was my fault, which already gives a sense of trauma, because silence, for the most part, certainly engenders many things, but one of the things it engenders is rage. So part of the book became, what happens to rage? What happens to these women's rage? And I realized that my mother utilized her rage for ambition. In other words, she was able to harness that rage and became this incredibly ambitious woman that really wanted different things for her daughters. She didn't want her daughters to grow up certainly as she had. She wanted us to grow up supported and with a sense of, in the sense of economically safe. And so then you must ask, why did I feel silenced? Because I did grow up in a middle-class home. My father was a doctor, my mother was a teacher. But I realized that I did what many girls do in my generation. My silence was a silence of self-censure. In other words, I essentially silenced myself in many ways. And so much of the book that I was looking at was, how does one emerge from that silence, whether it's imposed culturally or whether that cultural imposition becomes internalized. Because I also grew up in a time where essentially most women I knew were subordinated to their husbands. My mother sometimes carried my father's suitcases, just to let you know the kind of life that, she felt still subordinate as a woman. So there was a sense that as a woman, I thought of myself as being conflicted, because I knew I was supposed to be ambitious, but at the same time I thought I was supposed to be subordinate and charming. And most people, you can't do those two things. They're contradictory. Well, the reason I'm telling you this, it's a real long way for me to get to what I'm going to read. So just so you're not texting. I'm so impressed. That's a sort of I'm going to do this meta thing, but. One of the things I realized is that because my mother had grown up under real desperate circumstances and certainly wasn't mothered herself, that I was always looking for other mothers. Not consciously or unconsciously going, who's going to help me? But I think unconsciously, that was part of what I was looking for. How do women work in the world? I sort of didn't understand. How do they function healthily? Well, I began to realize that one of the things that girls tend to look at as their teachers. So I was thinking when Mary Jo today asked me in high school, like, what makes you write or what do you write about? I realized that lately I've written about a lot of teachers, you know, because they were the kind of mentors or the possibilities of other women for me. And the first thing, I'm going to read 3 sort of short things, and they may even get shorter as I watch your attention, who knows. I enjoyed sleeping this afternoon, so I'm not denying that possibility. But one of the things that Jamaica Kincaid talks about the still stopped moment, right? And Virginia Woolf talks about emblematic moments, these sort of moments that are crucial in your life, and the ability to sort of capture those moments. And so the first thing I'm going to read is actually an excerpt from a longer essay that's in 4th genre about this woman who was very influential to me, who was my music teacher, and her name was Mama Dot. That's what we called her. One sec. And I grew up in a tiny town in what I call the toe of Alabama. If you look at the state of Alabama, it has a little toe that comes out of the very end into the Gulf of Mexico. And I grew up in a little farm town that was 7 miles away from, now I can explain it as the BP oil spill, and you all know where I'm talking about. It's the only marshland in Alabama. So I grew up in this real conservative little town. But right next to my town, about 25 miles away, was this other town that has a connection with Iowa. And in the 1890s, during the Gilded Age, a journalist from Iowa decided that he was fed up with the Gilded Age, with this sense of excess of money and excess of riches and the sort of parasitic way that corporations and the wealthy lived off of other people. So he just started this, he and people from Iowa moved to this little town called Fairhope, and sort of what a lovely name, Fairhope, to build a socialist community. Now, of course, we know that that's slightly schizophrenic. I mean, man, he went to the Deep South to start a socialist community. I mean, this is the most conservative area of the world, right? So anyway, he goes to the Deep South, and they start this socialist community. It's a place where you couldn't own land, you couldn't own property. They followed the economic policies of a man named Henry George, and they started one of the first progressive schools in the United States that was started by Marietta Johnson. They had feminists who came. We're talking about the 1890s, guys. You know, not 1990. So 1890s and the early 1900s, there were feminists coming there. There was a progressive school that was started. Land was cooperatively owned. They had a cooperative. They had businesses who were cooperative. Well, obviously, by the time I grew up in the 1950s and 60s, that wasn't necessarily the case. But it was still a place that was very different from a normal southern town, because it had this influence of all these people who had moved in from other places and brought a sense of their culture and a sense of the right to be different. So that when I would go to Fairhope, to Mama Dot's school, to music, there would be these kids, and they dressed kind of like kids do now. They dressed funky. You know, we because we grew up in, because we had jumped class from poverty to the middle class. When you jump class, you tend to want to be straight and narrow. Like our outfits matched, you know, if you get my drift. You know, we had shorts and shirts that matched and tennis shoes that worked with everything. These kids didn't. They had their skirts hanging over, you know, slips were hanging out. They wore leotards over their clothes, and I found them, I was enthralled by them because they did the opposite of what we did. They had no sense of order. I mean, but they were creative. They just did things. And so I wanted to read a little tiny piece that's an excerpt from this larger piece about Mama Dot and my relationship to her. It's just a really short piece. It's, like I said, it's a longer piece. I'm just reading a still stopped moment from that piece. The larger piece is about seeing Mama Dot as my sort of second mother and sort of how she functioned that way. So I'm going to read that one sec. Okay, we have to go south now, okay? Let's try something new, Mama Dot said, her eyes brightening. Let's not be bound by the ordinary. And then she looked at me. Freckles dusted my nose. My hair billowed, a halo of smoke. I was 9 years old, small and skinny, with tiny feet and big front teeth. I didn't smile much. I barely laughed. Often I came to my music lesson from my dance class, dressed in my black leotard with its 3 thready runs down the front. "You have such natural grace," Mama Dot said, taking my hand and holding it lightly. "Let's put you on top of the piano and have you dance while Jean plays." I must have looked uncertain, even scared, as she closed the top of the baby grand so that it lay flat and smooth and polished, no more than 5 feet at its widest. I wasn't bold. I wasn't a show-off. I didn't like spelling bees. I didn't like the mad dash to the board to compete in an arithmetic problem, anxiety scratching at my ribs. I had a hissy fit before recitals and talent shows, and even the water ballet, where I was submerged in a chlorine pool. I thought of myself as lurking in the shadows, someone who liked to watch. I wanted to be bold, even lusted after the limelight, but the strategy of getting there left me hugging tight to my knees. "Here, we'll get a chair and I'll help you up," Mama Dot was suddenly decisive. She wasn't like the other women I knew. She never wore girdles or stockings or plunging necklines, never put on lipstick or mascara or rolled her hair. Her hair, cut short with a thicket of bangs like Mamie Eisenhower's, accented high cheekbones and fierce hazel eyes. Those eyes narrowed as if sizing me up, and then they softened, her lips parting as if in anticipation. I could feel something new let loose into the air. I would dance on the piano. "Just get a feel for it," she said as I slipped off my shoes and climbed on the chair, then onto the piano. "I won't let you fall." The height felt huge. If I reached up, really stretched, I could touch the ceiling. When I looked out the window, I saw squirrels scampering across the neighbor's roof, watched a dark bird soar high in the pale white sky, slowly disappearing from view. Then I stared at my sister's hands with the clipped fingernails, small and white on the keys. Mama Dot smiled, and my sister began playing Chopin. As in dance class, I plied, my body rising, sinking. I gazed with surprise at my knees, at how easily they bent and straightened, as elastic as rubber bands. I turned slowly and then lifted one leg in an arabesque, balancing carefully as if I were a figure in a tableau, a pretty girl in a music box. When I glanced down at Mama Dot, she nodded, her dark eyebrows rising in approval, as if she were proud of me, but also proud of her own inventiveness, the risk of doing something adventurous, even a little crazy, something no other music teacher would have done. I knew this was a whim, a fancy, and simultaneously a prelude to something more. I looked at the top of Mama Dot's gray head, at the slight fold of flesh beneath my sister's T-shirt, and some tension inside me shifted, a quiver at first, the sweating of my bare foot against the wood. And then suddenly, I felt as if I were swaying in midair, not flailing or trembling, but losing all center of gravity. Quickly, I folded myself down to a squat, both feet close together, my hands touching the piano, my heart wildly beating, my shoulder blades tightening like newly clipped wings. When I closed my eyes, I imagined one foot slipping over the edge, my body held by nothing but air. Who would catch me? I shivered. And then in my mind, I saw Mama Dot walking beside a group of us girls out into the blue-gray water of Mobile Bay. Mama Dot, in her plain cotton bathing suit with its wide, faded straps and boxy legs, her face tilted towards the sun. The tide was so low we could wade out far out into the bay, past the piers with their rusting crab traps and barnacle pilings. It seemed we might go on forever, the cool, clear water rising to our knees, then our thighs, then the bottom of our bathing suits. Mama Dot looked at me, and in the next moment, she dove into the water, slipping into another world, as if called there by invisible gods. I stopped, uncertain, the water glistening, still, the sun emerging from behind white drifting clouds. When Mama Dot surfaced 10 or 12 feet away, she turned, her hair slicked back, her white neck dripping with water, rising stalk-like from the sea. Her voice called to us, exhilarated, impatient. "Come on, you girls. What are you waiting for?" Now I looked at my feet on the piano, then out the window to where the wisteria bloomed, burst of lavender pushing against the glass, a bee lazily buzzing. The world going on. For a moment, I forgot to think, aware only of my body, my legs resting on polished wood as sound vibrated beneath me, my toes warm and weightless in the sunlight, my eyes almost closed as I slid one leg out behind me, the other forward, so slow, soft, inching towards the keyboard, my body bisecting the piano, my torso floating just above. I looked at Mama Dot. Very quietly, she nodded, a look of pleasure, and instinctively I raised my arms, curving them in a circle above my head, my fingers not quite touching. Just a little bit. Because what I realized is that Mama Dot taught me risk. She taught me that you could creatively risk things and you could fail utterly. And my own mother, because, as I said, we jumped class, everything had to be, you had to make A's. You had to make A pluses. We would come home, my father would say, why didn't you make A pluses? My father used to meet me at the door when I came home from school, and even when I was older, and said, what prizes did you win? And I'd be like, can we start with hello? Let's just, roll it back, baby. And so my parents, really needed this sense of, you needed to succeed. I needed, epaulets and badges and awards. They wanted you to put everything on the wall. And Mama Dot was not that person. Mama Dot said, let's just try this. I mean, it was crazy to dance on the piano. Piano's not big. And to take a little 9-year-old and say, let's put you up there and just see what happens, baby, So for me, she was constantly inventive. And this woman that, as a kid, I wasn't thinking that, but that's what I know as an adult. So she became this role model for me of taking chances and also of pleasure. Because after our recitals, she would take us all, and all the students would go in the back of the truck. We didn't have seatbelt laws then. And we'd pile in the back of the truck, and we'd go and spend the night on the beach by Mobile Bay. So we'd all just bring a sleeping bag. So she'd have like 10 or 15 kids out there, just sleeping on the beach. And it was really wonderful because, like I said, my parents, air conditioning, windows rolled up. So now I'm going to take you to another place. As I said, that I think that most of the writing comes from obsession and haunting. And we never presume, I think the thing is you often receive your hauntings. You don't go and you don't seek them out. And because I grew up in the toe of Alabama, in the 1950s and 60s, I said one of the things that was really haunting to me was race, the politics of race in Alabama, because this was during the Civil Rights Movement. This was in a period that was really apartheid in the U.S., and particularly in the South. I think at the time, as a child, my sense of awareness was episodic and anecdotal. So it was only as an adult that I really began to think about the politics of race and to think about my heritage as a white woman in Alabama. So one day I was in Iowa, and I happened to read V.S. Naipaul. I'm sure I mispronounced that. I have a southern accent that really just slaughters half of the English language. But I was reading a turn. So how do you say that?
That's right.
Good, thank you. I feel so better. It's because of this. So I was reading Naipaul. I'm going to say it twice because now I feel so uppity. And I do want to say, too, that Lauren had promised me that we could mainline Mountain Dew before I came on, and she didn't do it. She didn't get to bring the Mountain Dew. We were going to mainline, both of us, just chugging, out there. So if anything happens, it's her fault. It's not me, because she promised. So anyway, I was reading Naipaul's book, and if you hadn't read it, it's A Turn in the South, and you're probably not Southerners here, but still, it's just a really interesting book because he looks at he does these portraits of place. So I'm sitting there in my bed in Iowa and reading this portrait on Tuskegee, and I thought, which is in Alabama, and because Tuskegee was where the first historic black college was built, and by Booker T. Washington. And I was reading, like I said, reading this book, and I got up from my bed and called my one friend in Alabama and said, how do I get to Tuskegee? I just decided in that sort of impulsive way that I wanted to go to Tuskegee. But then, of course, I thought, well, what would I do? Just walk in and sort of like, hi, I'm here. So I decided that like I said, I decided I would teach classes. So I taught classes at the library, which was a very tiny little library. And it was just fascinating to me. But what I'm going to reference here is two things. One is that I was very influenced, I think, by Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. And I want to tell you why. Because Ralph Ellison talks about, I mean, it's one of my favorite books. It's always been one of my favorite books because he's just a marvelous writer. But also because he writes, and he says he's writing about the education of a fool. And I think that's what most of us are writing about, not ourselves in any kind of glory. Like my parents want me to be able to put a plaque on the wall and to write something celebratory. But most of us write about ourselves as lacking, as inadequate, as desperate, as hungry, as, surging towards something, but not getting there. And so, our first casualty. So he writes about the education of a fool. And so I wanted to do the same, is to write about myself as education of a fool. But the second thing I think was that I realized that in many ways, there were like two tropes in American literature that I was interested in. And one is that a stranger comes to the village, right? We always see this. We see this. I mean, I always think of Lena in Light in August. Lena walking on that road, the stranger coming to the village, and what the stranger expects. And the second trope is the writer goes home. And certainly you could look at James Agee and Thomas Wolfe. And I thought that what I would do in this piece, before I wrote it, of course, and before I went there, was that I would conflate the two. This would be a stranger goes home, right? Because it seemed to me that I would embody the sense of southernness, but I was going to a town that was 99% black, that had experienced white flight in the 60s, and in a way was a place that nobody wanted to talk about, except in policy terms. So I'm going to read a little section of this. I'm not going to read all of it. It's actually a piece that has two different voices, so I'm just going to read a part of it, and hopefully you'll be able to stay awake. And it was important to me to not, I mean, I think you'll see that I'm clearly the fool. But also, that doesn't mean I'm nice to other people. I mean, right? I mean, that's what writers do. They don't, it's not like I'm giving anybody else the benefit of the doubt either. It's like, hello, I'm here. So it was just a very strange thing that happened. So I'm just going to read a little part of this, right? One sec. And it's an essay called Skin. The class meets in a small storefront library, one shabby room with this life-size poster of Zora Neale Hurston and fewer books than my own library at home. 20 people sit crowded around 3 tables staring at me as if I'd just dropped in from Mars. I'm surprised to see 2 white people, a white woman and an elderly white man who sits erect and separate, a tuft of cottony hair sprouting from his ears. As soon as I'm settled in an empty chair, the librarian, Miss Louisa Dawes, a pretty caramel-colored woman dressed in bright pink, raps on the table to quiet everyone. Y'all, listen now while I introduce Miss Foster, who's come down here from Iowa with a Ph.D. She says each letter as if it's separate and important, and immediately I think I should be smarter, more poised than I can rightfully be. And yet the class looks unmoved by the announcements, as if PhDs are as common as dirt, no more bother than a dog's breath, a flea bite, and I tell myself to settle down and get with the program. As I move to the head of the table, I see the assignment I asked Ms. Dawes to distribute last week sitting undisturbed on top of the stack, and I have a small but cataclysmic panic attack. What am I doing here? Who are these people? My name is Carter Johnston, the first man announces, rubbing his hands together as if he's about to throw lucky dice. Everybody calls me CJ, so you can too. I nod hello, and we go around the room. Miss Carlene, Miss Javiera, Paul Z, Miss Roberta, Mrs. Bessie, Miss Cicely, Miss Lasagna, Miss Corrine, Miss... Men and women anywhere from 30 to 70 years old. 3 girls no more than 16. I'm excited that so many of you come here to the library to write about your lives, I say. You can hear the teacher voice, right? And I try to keep that. My voice sounds pinched, self-conscious, and quickly I move to the 15-minute pep talk on concrete detail and specificity. Now, when you talk about a hat, you've got to tell us whether it's a blue ball cap turned backwards on your head or a wide-brimmed sun hat with pink ribbons unraveling in the breeze. I plow through my field of knowledge, sprouting familiar ideas that grow like alfalfa in my head. Character, dialogue, point of view, dramatic situation, diction, exposition, interior voice. As I settle into my spiel, I greedily collect the heat of their attention like a single focused gaze. They like me. And I'm in the middle of a sentence when the white hand shoots straight up like a spear in the air. Yes, sir. I'm pleased by your first question. The white man leans intimately toward me, brow wrinkled, lips pursed. He swallows loudly as if there's phlegm in the back of his throat, then says hoarsely, "Now listen here. You're doing all the talking. I don't like that. What makes you think you have so much to say?" Something old swells in the back of my throat. I look beyond him into what seem like black, expressionless faces. One woman is quite beautiful, her tight gray curls sculpting a small, regal head. Another woman looks tired and bored, sucking on her bottom lip. An older woman picks lint off her T-shirt, which says in bold letters, "Advantaged." There's an awkward pause, and I realize I've misinterpreted their interest. They were merely being polite. "Well, she's the teacher, Miss Carlene," a large black woman speaks up. "She's supposed to talk." Miss Carlene smiles benevolently at me, and with that heat, blood flows back into my veins. I give Miss Carlene a private room and extra bath towels in heaven. "That's right," I say, as if this is news to me. "I'm supposed to talk. But I want to hear from all of you, so let's get down to the business of writing." Though they begin promptly, heads bent, pencils moving, all but 3 women stop writing after 5 minutes and stare blankly at the dust floating in the air. "I don't much like writing," Miss Cicely whispers when I ask her what's wrong. "It don't come out like it's supposed to." "I can't think of nothing to say," one of the teenagers says and begins erasing. "I'd rather read stuff in a book," CJ agrees, looking expectantly at me. But of course, I plan nothing of the sort. "Well, I don't know about the rest of y'all, but I want to read my stuff," Miss Carlene says proudly, then stands and reads a story about being invisible, unseen, sitting out on her front porch under God's blue heaven and vanishing like milkweed in the air. "That's wonderful," I say, grateful for this woman's lush, honest voice. "But she ain't white," CJ says. "Milkweed is white." "I don't think it has to be literal," I say, smiling. "It can be representative, symbolic, something blowing away, vanishing, you know." "I don't think it works," CJ persists, looking archly at me. "You don't know anything," Miss Carlene says. "Listen to the teacher." "I went to college longer than you did," CJ says, "and I know it don't matter if it's concrete, if it's wrong." Somehow we managed to get through the next 2 hours, the air conditioner blasting us with frosty air, the men and women bickering with each other, some not bothering to write at all, but chatting with each other while I talk. At the end of the class, people say their goodbyes, telling each other about the Saturday market on the square, about the revival going on down near Nottasulga every night. "You ought to come sometime," Miss Dawes says, "and see what it's like." There's the scratching of chairs, the sudden wash of heat when the front doors open wide. I see the old white man look intently at me, demanding my attention, and for a moment I think he'll apologize as he sidles up close and leans near. "I hope you learned something today," he says scornfully in his loud old man's voice. Alone in my room, I marvel at what I've learned. First, this is no adventure, no blessed return. Second, nobody likes me. I can feel it in their eyes. I'm just a drive-by visitor dumped in their laps. And writing, how could I possibly have thought writing made anything easier or clearer? Writing's just plain hard. It stirs up the water, makes things murky, cloudy, unsettled. All those ideas jiggling fast against each other, shaking loose fuzziness instead of focus. I'm so upset with myself, I get in my rental car and drive to the next town, a white town, where I can sit in a restaurant and look bluntly at white people, not caring a hoot what they think. I listen to the chatter of other customers, hear the waitress joke with 2 old men in the next booth. "Oh, I'm hanging in there like loose teeth," she says, as she fulfills her glasses and asks about their golf game. Then she sees me and smiles sunnily. "Now what you want, sweetie?" What I want is to understand why I'm here, to believe it's not all vanity, indulgence, some old karma working its way through my mind. I can stop there. It goes on and on and on. It's actually a really long essay that goes on with my coming to, what happens is the class ends up being just me and 6 women, and they're great. And we end up really talking about race. I mean, they say the first thing, this woman says, the first thing you see is color. Don't you try to tell me you don't see color, everybody sees color. And then she says, she said, I asked the girls when I took them home, I said, did you ever think of her as not a white girl? And they never did. She said, no way. They just call you the white girl, and that's that. So you're the white girl. And so we just really ended up having this kind of wonderful discussion that's kind of came out of my nervousness and their bluntness and a kind of willingness to sort of risk talk that sort of made me their friend. I ended up going back to see the woman who was the librarian, and she ended up telling me these sort of wonderful things about her life. I mean, there was a time in the South where women, she started telling me about she used to eat dirt. And it was a nutritional thing. During times of real poverty, there was a certain kind of white clay dirt that was actually had calcium in it, and that they actually sold it. I mean, there's still a store in town in Tuskegee that still sold these little bags of white dirt, and it was just totally bizarre. And she was a strikingly beautiful woman who had had a very hard life. But I thought it was very interesting to sort of have the chance to sort of hang out with her for a while. I don't have a watch. Oh, there's a clock. So one of the things, I was going to read a piece. When I said that I was interested in teachers, I became very interested in teachers, a lot of my teachers, because I'd had one really good teacher. And I couldn't find her. And I really wanted to find her, so I hired a detective. So I wrote a story about hiring a detective to find my teacher. And I'm not going to read it because it's way long and just too long, but it was just so funny because she was an artist and she was this incredible woman. She came, I was at UCLA, I did an MFA in art first, and as my father said, prolonging we actually call it the educational tit at this point, but it was just staying in school. And so but she was this marvelous teacher who, she finally did call me back. I mean, I finally did get her. And of course you're going to know this, right? She didn't remember me. It's the classic thing. Of course, she didn't remember who in the world I was. And then I sort of explained some things that happened that year. And then she did remember me. And just to let you know what happens in the essay, then she got obsessed with me. She started writing me 10-page letters and 12-page letters, and then she'd call me every night. And then she started actually psychically knowing things that happened in my life. It got freaky. And in the meantime, I found out that she was no longer an artist, but she was a cat rescuer. I mean, that sounds like, if you wrote this in fiction, it would sound like too kinky and you made it up. But I mean, she really was a cat rescuer, and it turned out that she told me all these things that I would never have known when I was in her class, because I realized, just tell me if I'm true about this. We still think our teachers live at school, like they don't really have lives, like you're just at school, like that's it for you. After I'm out of your class, you could just be on oxygen for the rest of the time. So, I just sort of thought of her as on oxygen and just, I don't know, doing other things. But it turned out that she had had a really rough life, was actually an alcoholic, and like I said, now rescued cats and didn't do art anymore at all. So it was a real revelation to me. But it was just such a funny thing. So I would just want to give you that possibility that you can't find somebody. You can risk a lot for a piece of work, right? You just do what you have to do. It didn't cost that much. So I'm relieved. But it was just really funny. It was just this totally bizarre thing that she ended up getting obsessed with me. But she taught me something, and I'll pass this along because if I can remember it. One of the things she said that I would never have learned from my family, who is all about, get your A+s and, wear your epaulets. And if you could wear your resume, my family would. But, you can't do that. But you can tell people. So she told me something, and you never, in my family, you don't tell people the bad parts. And everybody has bad parts. So she taught me that a lot of times you have to use your flaws. And that was a revelation to me. Because I thought you had to hide. I thought you had two choices. You hid them, and that made sense to me. Or you found somebody to fix them. And that's what my family mainly did. We found somebody to fix them as much as you could, or at least to give them enough patina that they seemed fixed. But she said that no, what artists do is they use their flaws. What the piece actually looks at is the fact that as it turned, I was taking a photography class with her, and it turned out I had terrible eyes, and it turned out I couldn't see grain, which is probably should have been a clue about art. I'm a little thick-headed at times and truly stubborn. So I brought these photos in, and she had just seen photos. People here do photography. You know how there's a sort of beauty in the grain, this sort of beauty in that sense of something that's finely presented, sort of the Ansel Adams sort of sensibility. And I saw his photographs, which I thought were deadly dull because they were about lawns, which I hated, and mine, which I thought were interesting but bad somehow. But she said, you don't see grain. And I said, well, how do I fix that? Because that's the first question. She said, you probably can't. And that scared me to death. But she said, it doesn't matter. And that was the real surprise. I said, well, what do you mean? She said, use it. Use the fact that you can't see grain. Make them grainier. Use the fact that you do something poorly to emphasize it and exaggerate it. So I ended up doing these like 10-foot photos, and blown up photos that were really these sort of strange sort of body configurations, but they were real grainy. She said, make them look almost like bad newsprint. So they had to sort of go towards the erotic and towards the perverse and towards, like I put myself on vending machines, and I put photos of myself on vending. It was really sick. My parents loved that. Like there was nothing I did. They thought, oh, don't bring it home. Not to our little town. And I was like, okay. So mostly I didn't tell them. But anyway, she taught me something that was just vital to me, that you could use your flaws, that you didn't always have to do everything that was about your talents, because I think I was having a hard time finding what they were, if I do say so myself. It was a hard life for me, being that kid. So because of that, I've been thinking a lot about stuff. And I thought I would close with a little bit of an essay called The Red Chair. It's actually an essay about writing. And so I'll read a little bit of it, and I'll just stop and tell you some of the rest, okay? Is that cool? Is that okay, or you just need to sleep? If you're texting and you need to, this is a good essay to text during. It's sort of textual texting, Anyway, it's called The Red Chair, and it's an essay about writing. So, God, it's like deliver me from people who do this. But anyway, I did it, so it's like screw me. Okay, I'm sorry, I have a bad mouth. I truly would have been better with the Mountain Dew. That's the only thing I can say. This is all Lauren's fault. Everything that I have done, if you have any complaints and you want to take them to the librarian, like words that need to be, X'd out and things, it's Lauren's fault. And we know where Lauren sits, don't we? She tried to tell me that the fumes from how many Mountain Dews she had drunk would work on me. But I am a hard case because I'm on fumes too. And so I needed the main line. So anyway, okay, The Red Chair. It's a beautiful spring day, and I've invited 5 women writers to my home in Iowa City. It's 1994, and I'm new to the Midwest, new to gritty banks of snow and the thin sheets of ice glazing the sidewalks, new to my job teaching graduate students at the University of Iowa. And yet today, I'm stepping outside that light, anxious to meet some of the women in this town who write. 4 women are scattered around my living room, sitting on the sofa and chairs, drinking coffee and doing what we do best, yakking about our lives, when a tall, dark-haired woman rushes up my front steps. She smiles at me and introduces herself while handing me a bunch of tangled daffodils. Over my shoulder, she waves to several of the women, then spies the red chair. "Oh, I love that chair. That's my chair," she says, and immediately takes possession, settling into its thick, ample cushions, her sky-blue skirt flounced over the edge, one sandal swinging loose from her heel. It's a high-backed, deep-seated chair in front of double windows, a place where a leafy fern drapes across one arm. My husband and I call it the Queen's chair. Truth is, I'd intended to sit there myself, and for a moment my mind spasms. What are you doing in my chair? I'm annoyed by her presumption and equally surprised by my own curious excitement, as if something new is about to be revealed. Well, I stare at her pale skin and elegant bone structure, at the way she glances restlessly around the room, as if assessing its charm. She lets one shoe drop idly to the floor and then turns to chat with the woman on her left. I haven't read this woman's writing, and yet I have an intuitive, startling premonition that she will not only survive, but flourish. Ridiculous. But let me explain. Though I know her only casually, I've met her once before, I recognize the territory. What she's got is appetite, a big, greedy hunger, urgent and demanding and publicly displayed. In fact, she's got what I've come to think of as the claiming gene. Mine, she says, I want that and that and that. When I say that she will do well, I'm not talking about the quality of her work, but about her persistence, a way of being in the world that predetermines, if nothing else, that I will notice her. Not only notice her, but begin to fantasize about her, to be haunted by her, which means, of course, to consider her in contrast to myself. I see her at her writing desk in the early morning light, slightly disheveled, the sleeves of an old navy sweater pushed up to her elbows, thick socks warming her narrow feet. She's working on a novel about her childhood and has almost finished her first draft. I see the cats roaming around her chair, purring. I hear the telephone ringing, see her email flashing, the Sprint bill lying on the table demanding payment. But she stays focused. She's writing a novel, and she intends to finish it. The rest of the world be damned. I smile to myself. I know she'll get rejections. Of course she will. All writers do. In my mind, I see her opening the envelope that says, "I'm sorry to inform you," those dangerously benign words beneath the editor's address. "Asshole," she mutters. She tears it up and kicks the leg of her writing table, brews a fresh cup of coffee, and then pulls out her latest chapter to begin revising. I persist in this fantasy about her because, as you can already imagine, I am both her and not her. I, too, have a big hunger, urgent and demanding, but alas, I'm easily distracted, surprised by the bright flutter of a cardinal landing on my deck, by the creak of the floor as my husband paces upstairs, by a sudden, inescapable need to email my niece right now. I want that and that and that, but I rarely say it out loud. In truth, I'm embarrassed to admit many of my desires, both to myself and in public, as if such ambition might be foolish. Too big for your britches, little girl. Who do you think you are? And rejections? Send me a rejection. I take it as a cosmic message to stay in bed. What I'm talking about is attitude and how one's attitudes towards desire affects the writing life. The desire to write, I believe, has nothing to do with legitimacy, nothing to do with talent, nothing to do with entitlement, nothing to do with virtue. Instead, that desire is the raw, unrefined, unfiltered self in action. It's the thing that comes before writing, the crucial element in any self-creation. It's the bold, risk-taking instinct, that buzzing, slightly hallucinatory feeling that engulfs your whole body when, bingo, you click with an idea. As the famous adage asserts, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog. And that's what I'm talking about here. The ongoing and often precarious fight inside, the determination to stay afloat, to do what you want to do, to define your turf. No advisors allowed. If you want to write, you have to follow your own instincts, even if that means sabotaging the prevailing codes, turning left when everyone else swears all the good stuff is to the right. Turn right, the majority keeps saying. All you need to do is to your right. But you turn left, subverting predictability, even at times the predictability of your own organizing intellect. In writing, instinct trumps intellect. If you want to write, you don't ask, am I good enough? You don't ask, do I deserve this? You don't ask, what will people think of me? You don't ask, what if I fail? You don't ask, how can I do this when I don't know enough, when I'm too young, too old, too scared, too poor, too sensitive, too needy, too everything wrong with me? You say only, I love that chair. That's my chair. But of course, I'm getting ahead of myself. The women in my living room have opened a bottle of wine, and now we get to the nitty-gritty about what we're up to, about the snarls and surprises and hesitations of a writing life. One woman's finishing a book of short stories, and she's worried about her agent's response. She'll tell me I need to write a novel. She'll tell me that only novels sell, and but damn it, this is my book I'm writing. Another woman has brought her first book of poems, a book that just got a pretty good review, but also a so-so review, that's making her hands sweat. 3 of the women are teaching and writing, and there's the inevitable anxiety about time management. Oh God, how to squeeze in a few hours of writing every week between all those papers we grade. Hey, you guys, the woman in the red chair suddenly blurts, I'm a new writer. I don't have an MFA or anything. I've never even taken a writing course, but she leans in close. I'm reading a lot and figuring it out. I'm pushing hard to finish my book. I glance at her, both irritated and interested. She has all the hallmarks of an exhibitionist, but what piques my interest is her confidence. She doesn't seem the least bit worried about her status, about whether she'll be seen as smart or stupid in this group of women who all have their MFAs and PhDs. Instead, she begins telling a story about being at a recent literary conference. I was maybe 15 in line to see this literary agent, and when she ran over time limit, she looked up with apology and said she was sorry, but she wouldn't be able to see anyone else. Well, I hadn't waited in line all this time for that. I went right up and handed her a copy of my work. You need to read this, I told her, and I want you to call me. Then I stood right there until the woman looked me in the eye and put the manuscript in her pile. I smile at such presumption, but the upshot of the story is the agent called her a week later and signed her. And her book actually did really, really well. As she talks, I stare at her, my thoughts somewhere between suspicion and envy. I can't help but notice how comfortable she looks in my red chair. At first, I admit I don't like her very much. There's something about her that reminds me of those girls in elementary school, the ones who boss all the other girls at recess, the ones who knit a tight, cloistered circle around them, whispering and plotting, excluding everyone who's not in. You're not with us, the alpha girl will call out if you try to sit beside someone in her group, or sometimes a reprieve. Come on, squeeze in, and despite yourself, you're pleased to be included. The truth is, I can't keep my eyes off her, as if she's wrapped in glitter, sparkling with diamonds, because she's so refreshingly self-confident. And I, too, wish to be bold with my desires, to demand that people listen. I, too, want to stand in front of a group and without premeditation say, mine. I know appetite, I know ambition, but mine has claws that sometimes rake and scratch at my insides. If I'm honest, my ambition is some fusion of dangerous and exhilarating rage and clean-hearted desire in which the rage often wins. And yet I feel ashamed of this rage because it's the anger of a wounded self, the embodiment of my unease in the world. It's a troublemaker. I feel I must hide it, deflect from it, as if it's a sick, paranoid animal I need to keep on a leash. And in trying to hide it from the world and from my writing, I often allow an alter ego that is timid and self-conscious and careful to take over. On the days of the alter ego's ascendancy, I'm sucked into quicksand before I've even written a sentence. On such days, I have to battle not just the blank page, but the skepticism of an obnoxious chorus that croons, "What makes you think you can do this? What makes you think you're so special?" It goes on. I'm not going to read the rest, but I am going to read just one little section because I do think it's a fairly long essay. I tend to write long essays, and so it's really hard to read something. I just want to read, at the end of the piece, I talk about, I'm just going to read this a little bit. The piece for me was trying to demythologize some sense of the writing. So this is just three little things. One is I said, the idea that hard work leads to great success is only one of the myths that dominate the writing life. In other words, there is a sense that you work really, really hard, then you surely will be a success. Well, that's not true, right? I mean, you can work really hard and still have some wonderful pieces, but you may still be a writer who publishes books with small presses and in small magazines, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I think that you make your peace with that, but I think it's naive to think the otherwise. I think it's also naive to think that the writing process only involves solitude, that I think everybody needs a group of cheerleaders, because I think otherwise you go crazy. You know, let's just face it, and there's no red chair for you, babe. You're going to be sitting there waiting, thinking, I'm drooling. So, you know, get a posse. You know, it's like you have to, it's not just solitude. You spend all this time with yourself, and you can just claw yourself to death. And I think the other myth is that exotic experience is necessary to a writer. I have a lot of students who travel the world. They've done these amazing things. And some of the students who've never left their hometown in Kentucky, right, they just blast past them, you know. So I think it's not about the reality of your external life. It's always about the richness of your internal life. And I think maybe the hardest thing for most of us is you always believe that as a writer that once you publish, everything will be okay, that you'll suddenly feel good about yourself. And instead, you just right back to square one. I think all writers know that you only sort of love the piece that you're just currently working on, and the rest is like, not my best, as they say, not my best. And I know it's late, and you probably have papers, but I'd be glad to answer any questions or text back and forth with you. I love to do that. It's just so cool. We can take pictures of each other. I've never done that. I took a picture of the river outside my room. I was like, I'm going to send it to all my nieces and nephews, you know? It's like, because they'll never come to Dubuque. I mean, they won't. So I was like, then they'll at least have a picture, and that'll be wonderful. Want it? Yeah. I mean, it's a beautiful river. I love to come by the river. There's just something, it's just so wonderful. In fact, it reminds me, that sense of the bluffs and the hills. It reminds me of that little town in Fairhope that's by the Mobile Bay. It's just really nice. Anyway. Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Patricia. And this is the moment I think I spoke to all of you about earlier. We're so fortunate to have, as you can tell, she's a charismatic and wonderful writer. And it's also her birthday.
It's my birthday.
And we're going to all sing happy birthday to Patricia on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday to you.
I'm going to sing too?
Happy birthday to you. I'm going to conduct. Happy birthday, dear Patricia. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And your award for that song is that we have some cake back there.
Oh, cool.
Say thank you.
That's
so
really good.
Feel free to buy books. Patricia will be around to sign, have cake, chat, ask any questions you have about the writing life or otherwise. Thanks again for coming, and hopefully I'll see you guys next semester at our reading series then.